Okay, so welcome everybody. I just want to first describe what this consultation forum will be. Ohio psychologists have often had difficulty dealing with treating patients under the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation due to the complex medical legal issues in treatment and reimbursement. The sudden transition to telemedicine from COVID-19 has aggravated these issues significantly. Tonight's program will focus on the clinical, medical, legal, technical, and ethical challenges that psychologists face in assessment and treatment. And tonight we have two speakers, and throughout we will have question and answer, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first I want to introduce Dr. Robert Kaplan, who has been performing psychological counseling and assessment for 36 years. On average, he conducts between 100 and 150 workers' compensation evaluations on behalf of employers and claimant attorneys per year. He presented his work on disability assessment to the BWC's Ohio Safety Congress and has done other presentations on BWC psychological evaluation on behalf of OPA, attorney groups, and employer groups. Dr. Kaplan has been successful in developing methodologies for conducting psychological evaluations online. In preparing a proposal to the BWC on behalf of the OPA Workers' Compensation Task Force, he also reviewed research literature of online evaluation. He will share his knowledge in these areas with us today. Dr. David Schwartz earned his PhD from Vanderbilt University in 1982, specializing in behavioral medicine and health psychology. He has had medical school appointments at the University of Virginia, Vanderbilt University, and the University of Cincinnati. He has published and presented extensively in pain management and behavioral medicine and workers' compensation issues. He has been in private practice since 1995, specializing in complex medically involved patients. He presently serves on the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation Healthcare Quality Assurance Advisory Committee and chairs the OPA Task Force on Workers' Compensation Reform. He will focus today on treatment and reimbursement issues with BWC patients, especially in the telemedicine arena. And I just want to ask throughout, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. I suppose if you're using phone, you can maybe just unmute yourself, I suppose, at this. I will be monitoring the chat box. So if we could just get started by everyone introducing themselves, and I'll just introduce myself, actually. I'm Virginia Clark. I'm the current Vice President of Professional Practice for OPA.
Okay, why don't we go across the top? I have the gallery view here, so maybe we can just pick people by their location in the gallery. I've got Christine Orr is the next person in the list here.
Practice in Beechwood, and I've been seeing workers' comp plans for a number of years. My recent problem has to do primarily with reimbursement and conflicting information I've been getting about the documentation required from the MCOs. So,
good questions. Next, we have Jennifer Lamanna.
Hi, I practice in the Youngstown area. Probably maybe a third or so of my caseload is workers' compensation. And I guess our main question remaining is phone services and what we know about any reimbursement, if there's any movement with psychotherapy codes for phone sessions, as many injured workers don't have access to an audio-visual format.
All right, then we have the Johnny Sinha. Did I say it right?
That's right. I'm Debjani Sinha. I'm in Cincinnati. I'm in private practice and just have a handful of BWC clients. So it's not a large part of my practice, but I'm always ready to learn new stuff. So I'm here.
Okay, and next up we have Eve Whitmore.
Oh, hi. I'm a psychologist. I work with Virginia Clark, and I'm been working with workman's comp clients for 20 years, probably plus, and they're just ongoing. I don't know, it doesn't ever seem to change. They're just ongoing concerns I have, and now with this change over to telepsych, I'm wondering if when things go back to the new normal, if we'll be able to continue to do this with workman's comp clients, since this is probably one of the best platforms for them.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Next we have Diane Lewis.
Unmute myself. Hi, I'm Diane Lewis. I'm in Toledo. I've been doing BWC work for also over 20 years. Probably I'm interested in any information that folks have in terms of what's going to be happening as far as MMI examinations. Since I do have a number of clients who are still on temporary total, and it's looking like this is going to be prolonged. I also am interested in whether or not people are going to continue to be able to be seen remotely even once things are back.
All right, next, Mike Granny.
I'm OPA Chief Executive Officer, and I'm just here to mute people and unmute people when they need to speak.
Okay. All right. Now the rest of you, all you have are numbers. If you call down a phone, all we have are numbers. I could read out your number, but I'll just read out the last 4 numbers because there's like 10 numbers here. So next we have 0032. You know
that's me.
Okay.
Yeah. Am I unmuted?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, this is Cheryl Blankenship, and my question has to do with health and behavioral assessments, pre-surgical intervention. Now that the flood is open for elective surgeries, I think I've got 8 or 9 requests. Some of the testing and the way it's handled and the way it's sent in is kind of a crazy, yeah, and the testing is not real appropriate for the needs of the client. And they told me it's used as vocational. It was originally, this health and behavioral assessment process for the Bureau was originally used for vocational rehab, not for mental health screening. So it's got some tweaking that needs to be done. So that's just some input about that, and some, need some input about that. Yep. Thank you.
So we got 7481. Call in.
Area code 419.
419 433 7481.
Richard Paulson, Sandusky, Ohio, and about half of our clientele are involved with BWC. Multiplicity of questions, but at least currently the phone kind of sessions are of concern to us, but lots of good questions have already been asked. and thank you for putting this together for us. My executive director, who is also my wife, is here, Darlene Paulson.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So next from the 614 area code, last four numbers are 5616.
Clark, I practice out of Columbus, Ohio, and I think my questions have already been asked. Thank you.
Great. Next up, we have someone called call-in user 1.
Hmm.
Do you know who you are, call-in user 1?
Or if you have not been called yet, you speak up.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll go by the process of elimination. Oh, you there? Okay.
This is Janet Dix. I have, my last numbers are 4595. I work with Virginia Clark, and in Stowe, I have had a long-term BWC client, and I wanted to get as much information as I could.
Great. All right, next from the 74 area code, we have 2815.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Gail Reimer in Marietta, Ohio. Are you there?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm calling. My question has to do with reimbursement on the teletherapy given COVID-19. We had called the MCO because I do see several people, and they said they gave us out a code and said that we would be reimbursed at the normal rate. Following that, recently when we submitted claims, we got a rejection notice, and the pay was extremely, the reimbursement was like $19. And then they had new criteria. My objection isn't that they changed criteria. What I'm objecting to is we were not notified ahead of time. When we asked about that, they said, well, you could have looked it up. But it's kind of hard to look up something that you don't even know that's going to happen.
All right, that's an interesting area though. All right, next from 216 code, we've got 5673.
Yep, this is Jeff Bullock in Beechwood, Ohio. I have my practice there. And my question is, it seems like the emails from the Bureau of Workers' Comp were pretty much geared towards when you going to open up again to see people face to face. I may have missed something, but it seems like they're kind of moving more towards that area, and I'm wondering where telehealth may end up in all this.
Yeah. All right, next we have from 937 code is 5882.
Hi, this is Don Scott. I'm a DEP evaluator, and I will be doing some face-to-face evaluations with folks one a week. Sounds like BWC is starting with that first part of June. And I wanted to find out about any safety precautions, any recommendations that I need to follow from BWC and the State of Ohio Department of Health.
Yeah.
This is Virginia. I forgot to mention that there will be another one of these forums May 31st, which is a Sunday from 3 to 5. And it'll be regarding barriers to prevention, barriers to treatment, and barriers to thrive. But that will be one of the things that will be talked about.
All right.
Okay.
Good to know. All right, then from 330, we have 4 digits, 5036.
Hi, this is Cecilia Schweitzer. I don't have any question.
Okay. All right. So have we missed anyone? All right.
Good.
So Dave, it sounds like most of the people have questions that, center on the areas that you're particularly adept at and knowledgeable about. So I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of figure out which questions to address first.
Yes, thank you. I was using the time to try to organize some thinking about the answers, and I will say there were some assessment-based questions, and I'm definitely going to come back to those. Let me just real briefly comment on a few of the issues that were made, which were in common. One point I want to make is that telemedicine was not authorized by the BWC as an emergency response to COVID. Telemedicine has been available through the BWC, authorized, for about 1.5 years before now. People weren't using it, and a lot of people didn't really know it existed, but it was there. I was sort of an early adopter. I had a couple patients who moved to Florida and picked up some patients who were wheelchair bound. So I had to sort of hit the ground running a little bit when this happened, but it pre-existed. So it was already present. There are several people asked the question of, will telemedicine be available following, by the way, my understanding is that the BWC in general is following the governor's guidelines in the sense of that we're basically in a state of emergency, and there are certain, that the phrase you keep hearing is for the duration. Okay, so there are some rulings and so forth that may change over time, but telemedicine, to the best of my knowledge, was available before and will continue to be available even after whatever state of emergency is resolved. Okay. And one thing I need to do is I need to find the reference. It is in the provider billing manual, but as you know, it's almost impossible to find anything in the manual online because the index doesn't work. But I have reviewed it, and there are some criteria which were changed for the duration, and we're going to be after them to change permanently, but the basic concept of it is there. And one thing to keep in mind is that there is no special pre-certification or pre-clearance for telemedicine. Telemedicine is a modality to deliver psychotherapy. So you do not need to say, I wish to do 6 sessions of telemedicine with patient X. You would request a C9 for 6 sessions of therapy, and you could choose to deliver it as telemedicine. There are no criteria of which I am aware that says, why you're using telemedicine, why are you not doing face-to-face? And again, this pre-existed. So it's important to keep that distinction in mind.
And I would think for those of you who want to do telemedicine after the emergency is over, you definitely should take some courses and get certified in telemedicine, because right now those standards are being relaxed. But once the emergency passes, you're going to be held to those standards of telehealth. And if you haven't already done so already, I mean, APA offers 8 2-hour courses that will help you get certified. It's free right now. It used to be $200 each time. So I highly recommend that you take advantage of the time now to get certified in telehealth. And in truth, I think it'll make you a better therapist online if you understand. I mean, simple things like make sure your camera isn't high or low, make sure you're looking straight at the thing, make sure you're well lit, make sure that, certain things about having a good presence online can make a big difference in your impact with your patients as well. So, there's a lot of great tips you can learn by just taking the courses. So, and then also the board is looking for certification in telehealth if you're going to be doing that too. So that's important thing to make sure you get qualified to do it. It's not that hard. It's actually a lot of fun. And I think it's the future, of psychotherapy.
Yes, Bob, that's an excellent point. I want your last point being extremely important. One of the things I'm finding with a lot of my BWC patients is a lot of questions along the lines of, can we continue doing this afterwards? Most of us deal with people who have significant physical issues. It's kind of hard to have a BWC claim for psychological condition without having a serious medical condition that usually involves pain. I have a lot of patients who are driving more than an hour to get to me, and they say, boy, it's kind of nice to sit in a comfortable chair and not have your back be killing you before the appointment even starts. So I think there's going to continue to be demand for it. And I think it does make very sense.
I'm actually finding in doing evaluations, people are a lot less defensive when you interview them in their houses, in their homes.
Yeah.
They seem to be a lot more relaxed, and you gain a whole lot of information by seeing someone in their environment. Yeah. And I had one guy, he showed me his backyard, his dog, his collection of miniatures, and I mean, it's and then plus for the patients with the back problems, they love being able to be interviewed lying in their, you know, couch or bed, you know, that it saves them a lot of pain.
It does, yeah. And again, there are also issues, as I say, you know, which we can certainly talk more about, ethical issues. I was talking to a patient today, and her daughter cut right through the living room. She has her office in the living room, is working from home, and daughter cut right through, and she said, "Oh, Susan, I want you to meet Dr. Schwartz, my therapist." Which, by the way, I took to say that that is consent to talk to Susan. But, you know, there are issues like, you know, generally when a patient is in your office, it is sort of your responsibility to maintain their confidentiality. When they've set up shop in their own living room, you lose some control over that. And again, those are potentially troublesome issues, and it is wise to gain some knowledge in them. And the APA course will do a fantastic job of that. Yeah. But one other point I wanted to add, by the way, which is very important, which we did, I think, have some success with, the BWC standards for telemedicine were pretty boilerplate in terms of the national standards. But one of them, and again, you know, such as, you know, two-way televideo with HIPAA-approved platforms and so forth. But one of the things that was a bit of a sticking point, we ran into some resistance on this, was their standards said computer only, that a smartphone was not acceptable in the billing manual. And, you know, and I'm not sure exactly where that came from. I did contact them and talk to their, you know, the head of the MCO group, and this is kind of interesting background. And I kind of, if you'll pardon me, I kind of liked my own argument. If those of you who have been doing BWC for a while, you notice, remember they went through a major revision of their website a couple of years ago? The primary interface you go through to get patient information and so forth. It's extensively redone. Well, the advisory committee in which I sit, they gave some of the information about the background of the process, and they told us, it was very interesting, an express high priority of the programmers was to keep in mind that the average user, as an injured worker, was expected to be using a smartphone, not a computer. In other words, they assumed that the average injured worker accessing their data and so forth would not have a laptop computer, but would have a smartphone. And please write the website with that in mind, which I think is a good idea. But I pointed out, if you're assuming the average injured worker doesn't have a computer and has a smartphone, why are you saying telemedicine cannot be delivered on a smartphone platform? And to their credit, they did say, yeah, that doesn't make much sense. We need to extend it to smartphones. And I'm going to be on top of them about that one, about that being maintained once we are, as they say, out of the emergency. Yeah. I guess
doing my evaluations, about half the people I talk to just have a smartphone. They don't even have a, you know, a laptop with a camera. It's on a smartphone.
Yeah, and I think that is to be expected. And again, the current platforms maintain, you know, HIPAA compliance and confidentiality, et cetera. You know, there are technical issues. I certainly, it's that patient who can't talk without moving their hands, who's waving the smartphone as they talk to you, which is particularly troublesome at times. It's vertical induction. Yeah. But seriously, it is a case of the Bureau. You kind of wonder who writes the standards or if they're keeping up in the real world. That is one that's very highly prioritized. And as I said, you know, there is no, the rule as it's written, it should be made, telemedicine should remain available for psychotherapy the way it is now. Once you move forward, the difference will be that you will most definitely have to be using HIPAA compliant platforms, et cetera. But I think most of us are pretty much doing that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, another thing you have to warn your clients about is to make sure they're not on a public Wi-Fi system. Yeah. Because then, even though that you may have an encrypted connection, but people can, if they're on public Wi-Fi, they can be monitored. So you just have to make sure to ask your clients, are you on a public Wi-Fi or on a, you know, there's systems called VPNs, virtual private networks. There are actually free ones available that even if you're on a public Wi-Fi, your communications can be encrypted. And so you should learn about VPNs, how to use them. There's some very good ones. I like ExpressVPN. There's also NordVPN. You know, there's some very good ones out there. For not too much, $3 a month, $6 a month, you can have a VPN connection from you know, and that'll protect the privacy. Also, a good thing to do is make sure the client scans the room with their if they have a cell phone, so to make sure they're alone. Because sometimes they'll say, yeah, I'm alone, but right next door, or in the next bedroom, is with the doors open, is you know, their sister or brother or kids, and they can hear pretty plain. So you ask them, can you please close the door? You know, so you'll have some more privacy.
It does raise, there's a whole separate discussion about some of the ethics of telemedicine, and one of the issues is to make sure the patient is informed. By the way, I realize no one said a word about informed consent forms, and Bob's very knowledgeable about this, and there is very good technology whereby people can sign forms over the internet. You do not physically have to put it in their hands. They can sign it, return to you. But there are APAs shared some excellent informed consent specifically for telemedicine psychotherapy. And it's a very good idea, obviously, to make sure your patients have reviewed and signed those. And one of the things they mentioned, by the way, is that there are the differences, as in that, we cannot guarantee physical privacy at their end. That is their responsibility. And therefore, someone can't turn around and sue you and say, my sister was listening, saying, well, your sister's out of sight in your house. I can't control that. But sometimes these things are assumed.
Another important thing is that if it's a first encounter with someone you haven't seen before, make sure you see their picture ID. So that you can verify who they are and that's the person you're talking to.
Particularly in the context of evaluations or independent evals. Let me touch on a couple other things. And again, I want to make sure, again, if you have questions, please make a quick note in chat and Vicki can raise them to us. Let me see. There was a question about telephone therapy. Several people asked that, which was an excellent question. Let me say, first of all, I agree completely that unfortunately, there are a not insignificant percentage of patients in general, and I think it's probably higher in the workers' comp population than in the general psychotherapy population, who have neither internet access, smartphone capability, and or the technical skills to use them. Now, sometimes that can be overcome. I did a session today with a woman I'd been seeing by telephone who her granddaughter is now living with him and was kind enough to loan her the use of the phone for that period of time. We set it up, introduced ourselves. She handed the phone to grandma and said something like, have fun, and went off to do something else. And we had a very nice session face to face. But, for a lot of people, there is the issue of telephone only. As you know, let me just mention a couple things. The Bureau's initial response was to authorize the use of telephone sessions. Now, I apologize, I'm blanking on the name. The Bureau does have a specific billing code for telephone consultation, which we have been able to use in the past, but the reimbursement was very, very poor. It was, let's say it was less than a third and often lower than that for the same psychotherapy rates. Okay. What the Bureau did, I don't want to say condescended to do, but was willing to do was to say, we will accept, instead of having to ask for pre-authorization for a phone session, because they wouldn't even allow you to do that without pre-authorization. Like, a couple of years ago, if I had a patient recovering from surgery, I could call and talk to them on the phone before they could travel, but I had to have specific pre-authorization for that service and had to explain like 3 times up to an appeals level of saying they're in a full body cast and will be for 6 months. They can't travel for their sessions. And that was for the privilege of getting paid 25% of the session. So they said, at least if you have a psychotherapy authorization, you can use it for a phone session, okay? But I have been on them repeatedly about the inadequacy of the reimbursement. As of the last advisory committee meeting, which was last Wednesday, they are aware of Medicare's shift. For those of you who have not been following this, Medicare has moved to reimburse phone sessions at psychotherapy rates. There may be something of a discount, but it will be pretty close to the rates. They are aware of that and are taking it under advisement in our realm. So my hope is that they will extend that such that we will get paid an appreciable percentage of our normal hourly rate for a phone-only session.
If I remember right, we were told that the BWC board had to approve the rate change, which is like so bureaucratic. But
which is not terribly unfamiliar for the Bureau, but at least they're aware of it. And again, the problem is BWC has its own legal and legislative processes whereby some things must go through multiple levels of approval. So it's not so much a matter of convincing the BWC administrative people that they then have to get their legal people to say it's okay, and then they have to get it past the board of directors, and other people have to have input. It slows the process down a lot, but at least they are looking at that. Whether they would make such billing retroactive if it's approved later is a totally separate question that I cannot answer now. So all I can say in regards to that is they are working on it. Hopefully something will happen in a timely fashion. I can't promise that A, that they will, and B, how long it will take. Wish I could do better with that. Okay. There was another question I wanted to touch on about, okay. The question, someone asked a question about the COVID-19 billing, or I'm trying to remember who that person was, but was it a question about that, were you asking about the MCO was saying you had to have documentation saying COVID-19 on the actual billing or documentation? The person who asked that question, could they reference that?
I believe that was me. Okay.
Yes.
And what I'm asking about, let me even give you some information. I got receipts from the Bureau of Workmen's Comp after I submitted a claim for doing a pre-authorized therapy session on phone because this particular individual did not have an iPhone. We're down here in Appalachia, okay? And so we submitted it and we got $19 and some cents reimbursement. But I also got this thing that said this was a email sent to me, telephone calls in terms of the billing CPT codes 99371 through 99373. And for example, on 99373, it says this code is to be used for complex or lengthy telephone calls, meaning an hour. It would involve, as I said, a lengthy and emergent counseling session with an anxious or distraught patient, detailed and prolonged discussion with our family member, and a seriously ill patient. This is the only way you could get a full 30 minutes for reimbursement. The rest of them are for a quick visit, and the second one is an intermediate telephone call, which they would give you 20 minutes instead of an hour. And that's what supposedly they said we were to be using.
Okay. Was this? That was basically what they were saying initially for telephone only. Okay. Yeah, that's somewhat of that's in parallel to what I was saying. They do have those codes which you mentioned, which are for telephone only consultation. They have pre-existed. And at one point you could get pre-authorization, and what they're saying is, okay, you can use those if you have a psychotherapy authorization already. But obviously the reimbursement is inadequate. Yeah.
But this was after they told me that, yeah, there was no problem doing my 6 sessions on telephone with this particular.
What they did not clarify is that, basically what they're saying is your C9 approval for individual psychotherapy 9083437 is approved, but if you deliver it by telephone, we will basically transform it to those 9937 codes and pay you at that much lower rate. That they weren't clear about.
Yeah, they didn't even mention that.
Yes. And as I said, the good news is you at least don't have to ask for pre-authorization to speak on the phone if you have a psychotherapy authorization already in place. The bad news is right now they are reimbursing it at that lower rate. And again, we are.
So will they ask which way, how much they're going to do? Quite frankly, I don't like doing that kind of effort for $19.
I can't say as I blame you. The only thought I have is, first of all, since you probably set aside a longer period of time, you can certainly spend more time with a person and at least bill the higher amount. I don't see that there is less work involved in 45 minutes, say, on the phone versus face-to-face, but it's still grossly inadequate. As I said, the Bureau has been made aware of Medicare's, transform to allowing, psychotherapy reimbursement at their rates for a phone. And, we've asked them to move forward with it. But how fast it will be, I don't know. I guess the short answer is if a person does not have a smartphone or a computer, they are still going to be a second-class citizen in terms of reimbursement.
I mean, you could ask the patient to borrow a smartphone from someone they know for the session. If they have that kind of relationship with somebody, I mean, that'd be a way to go.
I understand that, but it's also a question of, it's kind of like they weren't very forthcoming to begin with. And if we're talking about in the future, we're going to be able to do this. I think it's important to understand if we're going to be able to do this in the future, to make sure that everybody's very clear on what they expect up front.
No, I agree. I guess the only thing I can say is it pains me to ever defend an MCO, but they very much are playing catch up as well. I've been seeing all sorts of weirdly inconsistent billing responses and reimbursement responses. And it basically comes back to they themselves, they themselves don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. I remember that even though telemedicine existed, virtually no one was using it. They haven't seen any charges for it. And now they're being hit with it all at once. Some of them are willing to learn, some will dig in their heels and get obstinate.
Dave, along those lines, there's a question in the chat box. It says, I'm getting conflicting answers from MCO regarding documentation for tele video calls.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where is patient?
Yeah. Yes.
Specific that it is COVID-19 state of emergency with the intent of reducing exposure, etc. Billing is denied for inadequate documentation, but without specifying what is missing.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe
Exactly.
you should tell them what they should put in their billing so that they'll know what is missing.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that was gonna be the next one I answered. Several points inherent in that. First of all, we were having the same issue, which was billing was being rejected because somehow we were not noting that it was COVID-19 specific. Now, there is absolutely nothing in the BWC provider manual on telemedicine, nor have I seen anything released to the MCOs that says this is COVID-19 specific. I think the MCOs don't understand. We basically found it simpler to add a little checkbox on, I use a short note that is sent to every patient rather than the full note, and it has some checkboxes. One of those checkboxes now reads telemedicine, now reads COVID-19 check. Okay, rather than argue with them and say you don't have, there is no requirement. You're not saying I am treating this person only for problems related to COVID-19 or only because of the emergency. You have an existing psychotherapy relationship and you're treating the person. So it really is kind of meaningless, but rather than argue with them, we're just checking the box.
It's also a good idea to document where the patient was when you spoke to them and document where you were when you spoke to the patient.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the form we use has that.
Claim if you don't have that in there.
Yes. Two other issues that raises. First of all, you do need to, for telemedicine purposes, and this is in their billing manual, you need to document the location of the patient. Okay. The assumption is normally when you turn in a bill that the patient is in your office. You don't have, basically the assumption under the billing system is if your address is 100 Main Street, then the patient was at 100 Main Street. But by definition, telemedicine, they're elsewhere. So again, our billing thing has an area where it says patient location. You put the actual patient home address or the address where they're staying, which isn't always necessarily the same thing. And also there's a thing where it says provider location. By the way, the original BWC billing manual for telemedicine stated that you had to be in your own office to be reimbursed. They did make a change for the duration to say you could charge for services delivered from your own home address. Okay. It did raise a point, by the way. Most of us don't have a problem with putting our office address on a bill because it's our office address. Some of us might have a problem with putting our home address on a bill since that bill will then be on the BWC website and theoretically possible. I have not gotten a definitive answer and we haven't gotten enough of them back. And since I'm working from my office, I don't have enough of a database, but we have on a few tried putting in saying, it says where it says provider's location, it says provider's home, full address available on request, which is a nice way of saying I'm home and if you want the address, I'll give it to you, but I'm not going to put it on the BWC website. I cannot guarantee that will get you reimbursed, but it's worth a try.
And I think another key issue for those who work in border cities,
yes.
You have patients living in Pennsylvania, or Kentucky, or Indiana. There's a big issue here with being able to the jurisdiction that controls the law that governs your practice is the jurisdiction in which the patient is located, not where you're located.
Yes.
So if your patient lives in Kentucky but worked in Ohio or just went across the river to Cincinnati to do their shopping, etc., and then you saw them while they were in Kentucky without authorization from Kentucky to have a temporary license there, you're practicing without a license in Kentucky. And so that you have to make sure that you get the temporary licenses from the states that your patients are living in. In addition to that, you have to check with your malpractice carrier to make sure that you're covered for practicing in another state in which you're not technically licensed. And some insurance companies, if you have that temporary license, they'll cover you for malpractice. Others won't. So you have to check with your malpractice carrier if you're living in one of those border cities and seeing patients who are actually in another state when you're talking to them.
It's a hugely important point. I would add, by the way, there's been some discussion of this. OPA has done some work with it already. That if, you know, the good news is there are processes. I went through this when I started seeing patients from Florida, where you can basically become a telehealth provider from out of state. It was fairly straightforward. You know, you contact the Florida Board of Psychology. They actually had it was all pretty much automated through their website, download some forms, and the forms basically attest that you are a licensed psychologist, that you have malpractice insurance, that you're not currently under investigation by your own state board, et cetera. You have to have your own state board submit a copy of your license, which is certified. And then this is weird for Florida. You had to have like a business agent address in the state of Florida. And I found an internet-based company, which as far as I can tell is probably a big warehouse with lots of mailboxes, but they will forward 5 pieces of mail physically a year to me. And the whole thing was like $50, and the state of Florida said that was fine. So literally without ever talking to a human being, I am now a Florida telehealth provider. However, other states, Indiana and Kentucky, unfortunately, for specific examples, the process involves going through human beings at the state boards of psychology. And guess what was happening in March? Nobody was at the state boards of psychology. They were all working from home. So everyone trying to get their out-of-state license was not getting licenses or phone call, was not getting emails or phone calls returned. The consensus, including some input back from Ron Ross, was document that you have made the application and are following up, okay? As long as you can show you are making reasonable efforts to become a provider, the state board is not going to have a problem with you doing that. It falls back under the reasonable efforts during the state of emergency clause, as it were.
But even if your state board, even if the state board is okay, you still check with your malpractice carrier.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I think the general consensus is they'll cut you some slack, but I wouldn't assume it, particularly the case of insurance. Yeah, but that is an issue. And again, usually it's an issue. By the way, you can have unpleasant surprises, such as talking to a patient. This is the very first time doing him by telemedicine because I only see him every couple months anyway. So we're chatting away and talking, and it's all going very nicely. And I said something, we're kind of chatting. He said, "Oh, I like this thing in your office." And I said, "Well, I think your living room is very nice. You have wonderful taste." And he goes, "Oh, it's not my living room. I'm staying with my daughter." And I said, "Where is your daughter?" This was about minute 50 of the session. "Oh, she lives outside of Indianapolis." I say, "Great. I have been practicing for 50 minutes in Indianapolis without a license." So
one could always ask your patient, "Where are you right now?"
Yeah, one could argue that wouldn't be a bad idea. Well, actually, the funny thing is I do that because when I sit down in a session, if it's the first time I'm doing telemedicine on my form, I say, "Hey, I have to have your actual address. Tell me your address." And for some reason, I didn't do it with this person, and I didn't realize till 50 minutes later. So I immediately got on the thing with Indiana and got the paperwork going, and and I'm hoping they'll cut me some slack. But again, these, for what it's worth, I've spoken to Ron Ross, and his sense is that given the circumstances, as long as you can show you're making reasonable efforts, the State Board of Ohio was not interested in trying to collect your scalp over this. And keep in mind, the state of Indiana's Board of Psychology, for example, has no power to take your Ohio license. But still, we would like to stay on good terms with our neighbors. So again, reasonable efforts, try to get the paperwork in, follow up. And again, these agencies are reopening, and it should be possible to get closure on them.
Yeah. Up to now, things have been pretty relaxed in terms of enforcement, and because even interjurisdictional, practices have been looked upon as okay for now. But now that states are opening up, I think there's going to be a lot more restriction going on again.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a heads up. We have about 10 more minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, time has flown. But there were a couple questions, I think, regarding evaluations. I know one was about H&B assessments and MMI examination.
Yes, I can comment on those very specifically. Again, this came out at the last advisory committee meeting. The Bureau is restarting doing evaluations because, again, that does kind of slow the process. basically, and by the way, in the area of telemedicine, first of all, the Bureau is restarting evaluations. Their primary delivery mode is going to be face-to-face. Okay. In other words, they have solicited psychologists on the DEP panel and said, are you willing to do face-to-face evaluations? If so, you must show that you are meeting the governor's current guidelines for cleanliness, sterility, safety, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And these will be traditional evaluations, albeit I'm assuming that you and the psychologist speaking to you would be masked. Okay. And you will be in an office that hopefully has been cleaned, sterilized, 6 feet of space, et cetera, et cetera. However, the Bureau is going to start doing, or making available, I should say, extended disability evaluations by telemedicine. Okay. And Bob and I were involved. Bob carried an awful lot of water on this about trying to get the Bureau to make telemedicine evaluations available for everything they do. There's a whole separate ethics discussion about making people go to evaluations because they can't get paid or treatment otherwise, and that they have to do it face-to-face. But the Bureau is kind of meeting us halfway as a starting point. So they will make extended disability evaluations available, okay, by telemedicine. But this is an important point, and I really want you to remember this for your patients. They will not tell the patient when they call them to contact them to schedule the evaluation about the telemedicine. They will simply say, hi, Mr. Jones, we need to set you up for an EOD examination. Can you see Dr. Sinha on June 6th? Okay. But if the patient says, I am not comfortable doing a face-to-face evaluation, I would like to be seen by telemedicine, they will then set you up with a telemedicine provider. But the patient must initiate the question. They will not tell the patient that that is available, but if the patient asks for it, they will provide it.
Another important thing is that if you're going to do a face-to-face evaluation with somebody, you have to provide them with an informed consent, advising them of the risks and benefits they're taking by having a face-to-face evaluation with you. If you're treating the patient, you have to do what's called a risk-benefit analysis and document that you considered all the risks to the patient and the benefits to the patient, and seeing them again face-to-face. And it's always a good idea to have them sign an informed consent as well, that documents what the risks and benefits are for resuming face-to-face visits, and what they are going to do, what you're going to do to make sure that no one gets infected. APA came out with a form, a good template, that you can follow and adapt to your practice. But I think, again, if you decide to see people face-to-face, you definitely need to have them review that form and sign it, and you have to document the risks and benefits that you considered in doing that evaluation. It's not enough to just say the patient agreed or the patient preferred it. That you're still responsible if they get infected, even if they did agree. So you can be sued too. So protect yourself from that liability by documenting the risks and benefits and making sure the patient understands them as well. And that's especially true in the evaluations too that you're doing.
The trust also put out an example informed consent if that's your insurance. So
yeah, absolutely. Extremely good advice. Yeah, let me say, without getting into a political mudslinging aspect, that let's just say that the APA and I think our ethics level of what we think would be safe and where the preference should be for telemedicine versus the Bureau's judgment was somewhat different. As I said, they did meet us halfway. And by the way, they have told me that they consider these telemedicine extended disability evaluations essentially a test bed. That if they go well, then they will look very seriously at extending them to additional allowance examinations and C92s. There is a legitimate argument that the EOD exam is probably you can get by with the least psychometrics. Bob can give you chapter and verse about getting MMPIs and more other complex psychometric instruments delivered over the internet. But there is additional time and additional cost, and the Bureau has told us they cannot reimburse for additional time and cost for the testing costs of doing that. So even if they did allow it, you'd have to foot the extra cost yourself, which I think is unfair, but that's where they're at.
I see a question asking if we can provide them with samples of risk-benefit analysis and things like that. Just email me, rkaplan@kaplancc.com, and I can send you some sample forms and point you in that direction.
Yeah, and I wanted to say also, you know, Virginia, do you have a list, an email list of the participants to this, or can we get one? Because I wanted to share some stuff that we've talked about. I'll be glad to share the sample form that I use for documentation that has, as far as I can tell, everything required for reimbursement on it, and also a HICFA that shows it.
I don't, but I'm sure Michael could track that down through Karen.
Karen would have it, so I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, I will forward that to everyone. Basically, there'll be a copy of us. You know, I don't know how many of you use like a short session note to meet the minimal requirements of the Bureau, and this has everything that's required to document telemedicine reimbursement, as far as I can tell. And so far, knock wood, it seems to be working. And also, I did a HICFA. By the way, just this should seem simple, but remember, if you are billing for telemedicine, the location is 02. It is basically telemedicine has its own code, which is 02, and the modifier is 95. And by the way, there was a question about slightly lower reimbursement. For some reason, the Bureau has decided that when you do telemedicine, even though it's from your own office, that somehow your facility costs are a bit lower than if you do face-to-face. I guess the assumption is you don't have to clean up where the patient was sitting or something. So they discount it by a very small percentage. Michael, will we get in trouble if I actually give specific numbers? We're not comparison shopping between insurers. I just want to say what the Bureau has said. For example, for 90837, I believe their full charge is like 190. And if you do it under telemedicine, they pay 178. And I do not know what the difference is or why, but that 02 code is
between the facility and non-facility fee.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the difference is. I'm the same person sitting at the same desk, paying the same rent, but fine. So anyway, there was also a question about the health and behavior assessment. That's a very good point. I think the assumption would be that the health and behavior testing, you know, pre-surgical evaluations, right now, the assumption is they would be done face-to-face. I have mentioned the issue to them and told them I think they are doable by telemedicine, but right now, whether the Bureau will reimburse them or not, I do not know. So I
can tell you, they're definitely doable by telemedicine.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah, they're simpler than the other ones.
Yeah.
And I think it might be a matter of just asking the MCO specifically, will you reimburse for this? Yeah. Evidently, someone had asked a question about the DEP panel and informing psychologists, that evidently enough psychologists who do DEP evaluations for the Bureau have said they are willing to do them face-to-face, that the Bureau feels like they have the person power to do so. So I don't think they see telemedicine as high a priority as we would like them to in terms of.
But I think, again, if you're a DEP evaluator, make sure that you have that informed consent that for the person you're facing, that they understand the risks and benefits of
yes, absolutely. Yeah, the problem is when you're an independent contractor for the Bureau, they kind of see that you're the one taking the risk, which obviously the Bureau can get sued as well. But, okay, I'm trying to think I think we've touched base on all the questions that were asked. 19 full therapy, MMI exams, documentation issues. Okay, I think as far as I can tell, we've touched base on all the questions that were asked. Are there any other questions that have popped up over and above this, either by note or in person? Okay, let me add, by the way, that obviously I recognize names. I know some of you have contacted me by email when they've had questions, and I'm certainly more than happy to do so, and I am shamelessly willing to tap Bob's expertise as well. Bob is also on the BWC task force, and we do see our mission as supporting Ohio psychologists to do BWC. So if you have a question that you can't get answered, please let us know. By the way, I share almost all the billing related stuff I am sharing with Jim Broyles, and he has sort of a BWC billing file as part of his overall efforts for insurance. But I try to handle things up front if I can, because Jim basically needs to be triplets with his current workload. But we are coordinating data. So.
I want to thank the two of you. I'm on the insurance committee, and these are some of the same issues that we've been experiencing with just insurance companies. But seems like BWC has really been lagging behind everybody else. I'd really love to see that risk benefit analysis. That would be great.
Yeah, APA, like I said, APA has that template already out. You can get it. I think it's the AP article on now that you're opening your practice again, and what you need to consider, and
okay,
a link to it from there. But I can send that out too.
Yeah. Okay. The only thing I was saying, I'm a little, I won't say sad. I was hoping we might have some time to discuss some of the clinical issues. I will say that it has been interesting that doing telemedicine with BWC is like doing psychotherapy, but there are some differences, and there are many very interesting ones. You know, I certainly plan to continue doing some after the emergency ends, because it does add a tool to the armamentarium, and it's useful to have. But again, if people have some interesting thoughts there have been some interesting discussions like on the listserv about telemedicine issues and so forth in general, and you're certainly free to put them out there or to bring them to our attention. And we will share what we know, but we're very much interested in hearing from you as well.
All right, I think we're at the end of our hour. Is it an hour we get, or an hour and a half?
An hour.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. We just want to thank everyone for attending, and you've had some excellent questions. I hope they've been addressed. And certainly if issues come up, either, you know, short term or long term, please feel free to reach out to us through the listserv, and we will do what we can to address them.
Thank you.
Or back channel.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, all of you, please be safe and well and get through this.
Okay.
Yeah, you too.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Virginia, thank you.